100 years, 100 tsunamis. What happens? Today we're going to build a town in city's skylines starting in a pit, hundreds of feet below sea level, then try to build up and survive a series of growing tsunamis over the course of 100 in-game years. Just utterly breaking and ruining the game, making it into a disaster survival simulator. Catastrophic and exciting. But above all, wet. The rules are simple. On January 1st of every year, a tsunami spawns that will strike the center of our town. We must survive the wave and rebuild every year to try and build back up the most waterproofed town possible. And if we manage to survive 100 years without going bankrupt due to disaster relief, the reward? Our city will survive the challenge and will emerge victorious, wealthy and dry. But if we drown beneath the waves, then our city will die out and remain underwater, literally and financially, as we collapse under credit card loans. What would happen? So I spawned in at year 1 to the town of Seattle. $100,000 in the city supply, and I decided to start trying to build upward. Immediately, that plan failed, since we didn't have enough money. I already knew it secretly. This would necessitate building the first city that I would intentionally sacrifice to the first year's tsunami in order to collect tax revenue, and try again later. Unfazed, I carved a precarious road connection down from the highway into the pit, snaking its way down the deadly zoning area. Then I sketched out a few roads and zoned the first areas: residential, commercial, and industrial, carefully spacing out and placing my first few essential services, namely, the dump, right at the entrance to our town. You gotta keep expectations low. So we dumped the poop out of the north, and pumped clean blue, fresh drinking water from the south, powering and watering our town with essential services. The first year passed in relative peace and tranquility. I built up a suburb. Boring, but profitable. And then, at the turning of the new year, the tsunami came, at a pop of 4,000, but with a strength of only 4.0 to start on the tsunami Richter scale. It approached, crested the nearby island, reached the shore, then made an impressive waterfall downhill toward the homes. Mostly just an inconvenience for this first one, flooding some residences. We got lucky with it striking from the south, where it had broken up on the nearby land masses before reaching our pit. But this was only the first of the next 100. Homes could be bailed out. And so time went on. The second year, the town grew, juicier with taxpayers. There was a fire, ironically, after the tsunami, and we couldn't afford a fire department, not because we didn't have the money, but because I decided it would be a waste to have a fire department in a town with an annual tsunami. And so after the growth, the second year's tsunami came from the west. Larger, more impressive, and scarier than the first. When it struck, this one began to destroy buildings. Not just a few, but almost all of them. Except, of course, a few random factories like Goods Unlimited and Frank's Fish Stick Factory. Also the Ice Cube Factory. I totally threw it. Almost the entire town was destroyed, and it took about 4 months for the water to evaporate into the air. All that so people could move back in and rebuild their homes. Somehow there was still demand. But honestly, the amount of time it took to rebuild all the homes, then collect taxes for half the year, put us just slightly ahead of where we were financially the year before. Naturally, this came to a head with the nail-biting question: which would scale faster, the size of the waves or the size of our wallets? The answer was not obvious. So I did what any confused person should do and just took out a lot of loans. Just a lot of them. Don't look at the horrible interest rates. I couldn't afford a wall, and I didn't know which direction the tsunami would come from. So I decided to start just slightly raising small areas at the bottom of the pit because I didn't have enough money to really protect our city, where rich people would live at the top of the hill and be spared from the deadly waters flooding their neighbors below. Infrastructure. We paved roads atop the hill to link them to the plebs living below in the undercity, and we started burning the garbage in the town to slap a band-aid on the larger problem at hand. There simply wasn't enough time. Then, when there was too much garbage to burn, I just returned to the age-old strategy of destroying everyone's homes if they had too much garbage in them, then collecting taxes from the next people who moved in until they either built up too much garbage too, or their house would presumably be destroyed with the next tsunami. Speaking of which, it was time for the third tsunami. This one wasn't as bad as the last one, and it proved my strategy was working. The rich folks on the higher ground were spared most of the water. The rest barely survived. Then out of nowhere, there was a tornado in 2004, and right when I was about to pay back all of my loans, So we accepted a bailout offer from the federal government, then used the money to expand the small, dry plateau to save more houses from flooding. In 2005, you guessed it, another tsunami hit, but this time it was on the north side of town. Home to our poop dumping site, the Tsunami, a wave far more unpleasant and dreadful than any we had yet encountered. I knew immediately that everyone would die. Springing to action, I knew I needed money as well. But I also knew that I needed more money to pay off my loans, so I raised taxes from 9% to 29% 1 month before the tsunami struck our shores. Briefly, we made a killing. Then, when everyone was distracted by their ridiculous tax bills, the shadow of the wave blotted out the sun, purging angry taxpayers in a flood of literal crap. Both neighborhoods, high and low, rich and poor, were devastated. But mainly the poor. It's okay, I did it for the greater good. I began to observe a pattern that, although it would be expensive to raise the outer walls, building a moat inside of the pit itself might protect most of the town from the waves once they had fallen into the pit itself. So I spent the years between 2005 and 2007 raising money by hiking taxes right before the disaster and surprising my taxpayers, then cutting out all civic services during the disaster to save money, as I gradually built a moat around the town, which, as it turned out, was almost completely ineffective by the time I had completed it in 2009, since the series of tsunamis and tsunamis was getting ridiculous and out of hand. I had to act soon. The waves were outpacing my tax collection, and the poop water was forming a lake in the center of town that was taking over 6 months to evaporate into the air. Not waterfront property anymore, but poop waterfront property. So in a last-ditch effort to save the town, which wasn't keeping up with the water, I took out $280,000 in loans, and we got lucky with a small, broken-up tsunami in 2010 from the north, giving us just enough money to face the deadly tsunami of 2011, which would normally have destroyed us all, but instead we procrastinated and built up barely enough of a dirt wall on the outside to contain the wave with all the money I had taken out as a loan. That allowed us to collect the uninterrupted stream of tax revenue without everyone's house being destroyed, to then take out 2 smaller loans to actually refinance our most expensive, high-interest loan and save our town from financial suicide. Can you say, massive credit card debt? Amazing to say. Triumphant, we had successfully planned out the first, most difficult years of the tsunami, but greater waves were still yet to come. Knowing that I'd have enough money to keep procrastinating and building massive dirt skyscrapers to contain the Noahic floods, starting in 2012, I took the liberty of expanding the lower town into a densely populated slum. But it was our slum. I repeated the same stupid dirt wall techniques for the tsunamis in 2012 and 2013 when I allowed some of the water to spill over the wall into our moat, making the terrifying properties beneath the cliff to the ocean into luxurious beachfront villas. We were barely alive. I mean it, everyone in town was getting sick and stupid since there was no school. Now we could consolidate. It was time to clean out the stupid people from our town. How would we raise GDP? After all, we needed money to pay for more dirt, to protect ourselves from tsunamis that were growing larger, 2013 to 2020. The waves grew higher and higher on the tsunami Richter scale. By 2021, things started accelerating. I raised density in the lower town, and poured money into procrastinating by building more dirt walls, but only on the side where the tsunami was coming from. The 2021 tsunami got through the hole in the highway, so I built a bowl around the overpass to contain the waters. The town was gross and dirty, and I'm not just talking about the poop water. So as we educated our stupid people, we started replacing the factories with offices. This raised GDP from 2020 to 2030, allowing us to erect larger and larger walls, basically just ignoring any approaching tsunamis and continuing with our lives as if everything were okay. Just ignore the giant dirt walls all around you. I stopped noticing the tsunamis at all, except of course whenever they made it through one of the holes, which usually just caused a little bit of flooding. By 2030, education was fully funded, and we started pushing away the poop with clean water. Now we could address long-term systemic health risks. GDP rose, and tax collection was starting to raise enough money that we could actually begin to consider the $100 million idea of raising the entire town, saving us from all the tsunamis once and for all. I decided that this would be high enough that we'd be safe from anything. But it would be expensive, and honestly limited to one cell. There's only so much density you can build in. So starting in 2036, I mostly just left my computer running while collecting taxes, and feeling relatively safe that the town would just run itself with the innocuous visit from the annual tsunami. Time passed and boredom set in. With the funds collected, by 2050, I got back to gaming and paid $10 million to start cleaning the poop into drinkable water, then dumping it back into our moat to slurp up into our water system. With that, we started facing the strongest level 10 tsunami, which stood no chance against our walls. I gotta be honest with you though, from this point I had basically declared victory, but the rest of this playthrough consists of me launching multiple level 10 tsunamis for every year from 2050 to 2100, ultimately at a max of 50 size 10 tsunamis in the end. It didn't make a difference though. Gradually I started just raising all the dirt in town and displacing people from their homes for the greater good, moving them up to higher ground where it was safe. You know, ultimately I was happy that although I cheesed my way through the first 50 years, my computer was powerful enough to run day and night, raising capital like a Bitcoin mining farm, just for the sake of showing you what happens when I seek a spiritually fitting end to the dumbest challenge I've ever tried in this game. Just know that I did it for you. It couldn't end any other way than this. And in the end, it was worth it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. A big thanks to my patrons, who are always the first ones to move onto the higher ground when the next tsunami comes. I'm Ambiguous Amphibian. Until next time.